very, very interested. I am very, very interested. I think most of the audience knows you very well. As a director of our School of Buddhism, languages, culture, Buddhism, I said because the diploma in Buddhism is under you, but basically languages and culture. So you are the right person to talk about it. And going by the registrations, it's really very encouraging. The response is very encouraging. I'm very happy that we could go for this. Let's see whether if this interest is retained, then we can do something about it later on a larger scale, on a longer duration. Okay, are you okay with it?
Sure, ma'am.
Yeah, okay. I think you should continue. Those who are early should not suffer because those who are joining late, right?
Yeah, ma'am.
Yeah, thank you. Please go ahead.
Thank you so much, ma'am. So let's start. This actually started, so I will give my acknowledgements straight away. This started with Dr. Krush Talal and Dr. Mugda Karnik. Once in a stray WhatsApp group conversation, they asked me how Indian punctuation works. How did people know when to, grammatically order sentences well before we started adapting Western punctuation. So that got me thinking, and I had to do a little bit of research. And then they sort of invited me to put together a public talk. So I kind of said, okay. So welcome to Viramavali. Virama is the basic punctuation mark, the full stop in Sanskrit and Indian languages. And so I've used that as the name for this. This is uh, a sort of collection of various ideas regarding punctuation, how much of it is direct, how much of it is indirect. Uh, and you will see two forms of punctuation actually. So, when I was doing the research, I realized that there isn't just punctuation, but a related concept called cantillation, which marks accents required for the correct chanting or singing of verses. And because a whole lot of this knowledge was actually once passed on through the oral means, through what we know as Shruti, which is listening, and Smriti, which is memory. Uh, Chanting, or often as it is called canting, uh, was very important in the transmission of knowledge. And this is true not only of Sanskrit, which is largely the focus of this talk, but also of several other languages, which I will cover. And this is not true only of the Indian subcontinent, but also across the world. So there is tremendous importance in how, for example, Quranic verses are recited correctly. Similarly, with sacred texts of the Christians, of the Jews, of you name it, the Buddhists, the Jains, there is tremendous importance given to the way there are pauses taken, to the way there are accents made, emphasis made, and so on and so forth. So this is what this lecture will cover. So coming to the first slide. I'd like to start with a very interesting story. So there is a book called Eats, Shoots and Leaves, which actually I read nearly 20 years ago, and which sort of started me on this journey of studying punctuation and how important it is to modern language. And something we don't quite realize is we live in a double life. So when we speak, we don't speak out punctuation marks, right? We use changes of tone of voice. We use pauses, long pauses, short pauses, right? And various other things to convey, information. We use various other hand gestures, etc. For example, it's sometimes called the unspoken language to communicate meaning. But when we're dealing with print, we are immediately used to punctuation marks. In fact, if we see a printed document without any punctuation, we would be quite taken aback. So I was, so that book really started my journey of studying punctuation. And there was this dedication in the book, which, set me off on a little side journey. So in 1905 was the first Russian Revolution. It failed, and then there would be a second revolution in 1917. But the 1905 revolution was actually triggered by a number of unionized workers at the Saitin print works, okay, who were protesting working condition. And one of their demands was that they should be paid a fair wage per 1,000 letters set, including punctuation marks. So that was their reason for starting the strike. And when they went on strike, printers from several other printing companies went on strike. That strike got supported by people working in other companies, and that triggered the entire city's working population to go on strike. And that was the start of the 1905 Bolshevik Revolution. It failed, but it essentially tells you that what started over punctuation marks is not something that is necessarily a small obsessive thing, but matters a lot to us. So now let's look at how we have been punctuated. Okay, it is not a natural thing to us. As I said, we live double lives. When we're speaking, we're not punctuated. So in fact, this one had the first poster that I put up actually had an Easter egg, which actually one person only caught up. So that's because we tend to read texts, and while we know the punctuation marks are there, we sort of do not pay so much attention to it. Okay, so there is a full word missing and a comma missing, but that did not hinder anyone. There were plenty of registrations before the Easter egg was got. So, it's not something that comes natural to us. And even today, I think we sort of distinguish, say, between elite and non-elite, between, the kind of words we use and the way we use punctuation. So you can be either in the Shashi Tharoor category or in the cattle class category, depending on your, usage of punctuation and vocabulary. And it's sometimes seen as an elitist project, but let us see how far that is true. Okay. So what happened when there was no punctuation? Punctuation was actually invented, a lot of modern punctuation marks actually, invented by Italian printers from the 17th century onwards. So modern signs that you see, like the full stop, the comma, the colon, the semicolon, the M dash, the N dash, the hyphen, the apostrophe. So many of these punctuation marks actually come to us from Italian printers. Okay. And Lindros has done such a good job that I don't need to repeat anything that she says. I'm just going to now look at the non-Western world. But for the brute majority of written history, from the very, very first texts, that emerge in Mesopotamia right down to around the 17th century, humans actually did not use much punctuation in their texts. And this is what they tended to look like. They were just not even spaces, even the space that, is a form of punctuation that we're very convenient with, and which at least now we use in every language to separate distinct words. Even those did not exist. So the idea was called scriptio continua. And it was actually believed, almost like a secret thing that then only people who knew to read and write, because the technology of reading and writing itself was considered something very specialized, just as in today's society, perhaps, coding computers is seen as a very specialized thing, and coders have a different life compared to non-coders. So while we are deeply dependent on computers, all of us cannot like open a computer and check its code, right? Similarly, there was a time when reading and writing, even though messages between kings and texts and things were very influential, most people could actually not read them. And these were seen as things to be zealously guarded. And one of the ways was using scriptio continua, so that only those trained to pick out words and use certain conventions could actually read the document unambiguously. But that clearly changed once the printing press came into place. Okay. The problem with scriptio continua is that it causes a lot of ambiguity. So I remember an anecdote when I was learning the Modi script. Okay. Which was that all medieval documents written in the Modi script are in scriptio continua. There are no spaces, no commas, no full stops, no nothing. So when you see a sentence like this is in Marathi, how do you divide it into, meaningful words? So do you write Rastyat Natsat Mashe Chaltat, which would imply that fish are, progressing on the road while dancing. Or would you say Rastyat Natsat Tamashe Chaltat? That is song and dance is happening on the road, right? The first is bizarre, whereas the second is logical. Okay, now this is obviously a very absurd example to give you just to use an extreme point to make my case. But there can be a lot more ambiguity which can be created by incorrect, breaking of the words, and which could lead to very serious miscommunications. Okay. So there are various kinds of ambiguities, and that is the purpose of punctuation, which is to break through these forms of semantic ambiguity. Okay. So the first is lexical ambiguity. So here you have, for example, the word Rajaputra. Okay. It can mean two things. Okay. Depending on the way you stress the words. So it can mean son of a king, Raja ka putra, Rajaputra, or son who is a king, Rajaputra, right? Mera Raja beta. So that is lexical ambiguity, where the word itself is ambiguous and does not offer anything. Then there is sentence level ambiguity, which can be solved to some extent with the help of proper punctuation. Okay. This is a famous joke running among a number of people in Marathi again. It's a very famous song, Totsa Chandra Mana Bhat. Okay. But you break it up as Totsa Chandra Mana Bhat, I mean, consider the moon as rice, which is, as other people would say, weird. Or do you say Totsa Chandra Mana Bhat? Okay. The same moon is in the sky. Okay. From the rest of the context of the song, you will quickly grasp that this is the intended meaning. And this is an obvious parody of the meaning. There is also syntactic ambiguity, which happens even after there is punctuation added. Okay. So, for example, Meri or Meri girlfriend ki shaadi ho rahi hai, which does not imply whether you are marrying your girlfriend or you and your girlfriend are getting married separately. So, a lot of purpose of punctuation is meant to sort out these kinds of ambiguities, but it has its limits at both ends of the spectrum. So a lot of modern punctuation that you see, okay? So here's for example, a letter written in Sanskrit where you are seeing a whole number of punctuation marks, like the danda, a comma, quotation marks, and so on, which are not native to Sanskrit. But since the advent of printing in India, even the space is also alien actually. But since the advent of printing in India, these European marks have essentially become now a daily feature of all Indian languages because it kind of helps with the reading and what I would in English call spashtikar, right? But there is nevertheless a long tradition of indigenous punctuation. And what is interesting about it is that it is both explicit and implicit, and the implicit punctuation even more so. Okay. So before that, just a little history of punctuation. Okay. It has existed in some or the other form ever since the beginning of writing. So some kind of spacing, some kind of derivative of meaning has always existed. So here's actually the one in the circle is a cuneiform word divider. So these cuneiform marks that were seen in this great big inscription at Behistun in Iran, when European scholars started studying these inscriptions to figure out what their meaning was, the first thing that was actually deciphered was this little diagonal mark, which the scholar, who was a German scholar, who guessed correctly that this was actually a word divider. That is, it did the same job as a modern space does in in all our modern languages. That is, between these two marks, all the characters between these two marks were to be considered one word. So this starts here and ends here. So all these characters are part of one word. Okay, so 1 to 1. And this is the same word repeated here. So that way they sort of figured out, that there are certain words that are very common, and then you can sort of use those bits of knowledge to figure which those words are. So, punctuation is one of the easiest things to decipher from an unknown script. Similarly with Egyptian hieroglyphic. Okay? One of the earliest things that they could figure was that certain bunches of Egyptian hieroglyphic characters were actually, set inside a little box like this. Now, the Egyptian script was deciphered, because of this legendary Rosetta Stone, which is in both the Egyptian and Greek languages. And so by correspondence, they noticed that there were Greek names that were appearing wherever these boxes were appearing. So they figured that these boxes carried those Greek names. So these boxes are called cartouches, which is the French word for cartridge, like a bullet cartridge. And that the name inside is a proper name. So this is a punctuation mark indicating that the word is a proper name. So these are two of the oldest punctuation signs known to us from very ancient writing. But over time, different languages and scripts have developed different ways of punctuating written communication. Okay? So from there, let's come to traditional Indian punctuation. So as I said, there is implicit and there is explicit punctuation. So now let's take a deep dive into both of these kinds. Okay? Explicit punctuation in Indian texts is actually a fairly recent phenomenon. Okay, partly under the influence of the West, and partly because, well, people have always felt a need to clarify texts. But implicit punctuation has actually done most of the heavy lifting for most of the history of the written word in the subcontinent. Okay? I will focus myself mostly with Sanskrit and Pali texts. So, because the systems are the same and the implicit punctuations used in these two languages, but they are applicable also widely to most Indian languages. Okay, simply because of the tremendous prestige that Sanskrit and Pali had over the remaining other languages. Okay, so the first part that we'll come to is inflections. Okay, many of you who are from my generation know this song very well. Okay, some of you are probably mentally got the earworm and are singing it. But what it highlights is the fact that Indian languages are very inflected. Okay, an inflection means that a word has certain kinds of endings or modifications that tells you its exact grammatical function. So its grammatical function depends entirely on the word and its endings, okay, or things that are prefixed to it, and independent of the position of the word in the sentence. So this is the benefit of what is called an inflected language, which allows a lot of flexibility in word order. Okay. And that is why Indian poetry has been so rich, because this flexibility allows them to make up all kinds of sentences that will not normally happen in normal speech. Okay. But none of these four sentences, for example, uh, you know, will constitute any normal conversation. We will usually say, मैं जाती हूँ, क्या जल्दी है, right? We will not say जाती हूँ मैं. We will not say जल्दी है क्या. But even when this is written this way, the meaning is not lost at all. Whereas in English, if you were to do this, English is a syntactic language, partially. So the position of the word determines its uh, meaning. So I am going is a meaningful sentence. Going I am sounds odd. Okay. So inflected languages therefore do not really show so much dependence on punctuation as much as non-inflected languages do. Okay. So this trick has been used heavily uh, across Sanskrit literature. Okay. So you know this very famous verse from the Bhagavad Gita, okay, where from the normal speech word order, what you would call the word order of prose, te adhikarah karmani eva asti. Okay. So this is how you would otherwise regularly have spoken. But in poetry, it becomes karmani eva adhikar for metrical convenience. It condenses the, uses the power of sandhi, which I will come to condense the total number of syllables and therefore adhere to meter. So all these are closely related. Okay. So there are a huge number of inflections, and all of us will have, those of us who had at least a little bit of Sanskrit in school, we would have learned many of these tables by rote, sometimes completely failing to understand why we were doing this, because many of our modern languages do not bother with these case endings or inflections. Okay, these inflections do a lot of purpose. Okay, so they tell you, for example, the whether it is singular or plural, they tell you which case it is. So is it deva means it is singular and nominative, devena means it's singular and instrumental. Instrument case means getting something done by making that person an instrument of something. So idam devena kritam means this was done by the gods. The gods were the instrument through which this thing was done. And so things move on like that. Okay, devasya means of the gods. And so these cases mean that there is no need for prepositions. In a syntactic languages, like in English, which does not have too many cases, it needs to, it depends a lot on prepositions to sort of tell you the function of the word. So inflections do a lot of heavy lifting. Okay. So this is what is called declension. So all nouns, the inflection pattern of a noun, you have to learn them, and very often there are multiple tables. And after some time, you sort of start figuring out that, if it's a noun that ends in a certain syllable, then it tends to take on these case endings. And after that, sort of after a few years, it becomes normalized. But when you're learning it formally, you end up having to by heart these tables. Sadly, I think many of us who learned Sanskrit in schools never went beyond these tables. So we never really learned to appreciate them. Okay. Verb conjugation. So the inflection of a verb is called its conjugation. And depending on the tense of the verb, and depending on who is doing the action, it changes. Okay. So And these are, you can see them very prominently in the Dravidian languages. Okay. The ones in red indicate the tense and the endings in black indicate the person. So I am a Tamil speaker. I would say நான் செய்கிறேன், நீ செய்கிறாய். I would say நாம் செய்கிறோம், நீ செய்கிறாய், அவர்கள் செய்கிறார்கள், and so on and so forth. So this communicates so much information, okay, that its actual position in the sentence does not matter so much. And therefore, poets are able to make a tremendous use of that. And remember why poets, when I specifically say poets and not just writers, is because, meter and writing things in rhythm and rhyme also had a tremendous grammatical function, apart from being easier to memorize and easier to transmit orally. So in a culture that is largely oral, these case endings make a tremendous difference to the way literature was preserved. Okay. So now let's see how, when you see an ancient inscription that is written without any punctuation, you can parse it and actually make out its meanings using just the inflections. Okay. So this is an inflection at Kanheri. Okay. It's just 3 short lines. It says Soparaga Negama Samikupasaka Sapodiya Deyadamma. Okay. How on earth do you know now what the meaning of this is? How do you separate the words and make sense of those words? Okay. So we go back to the inflection. So we do know that this is the Prakrit language, which is very similar to the Pali language. Okay. And now one common feature in the Pali language is that genitive endings end in "sir." Okay. So let's use that as a thumb rule and say that wherever there is a "sir," it implies a noun that has a genitive ending. That is a possessive case. Okay. So we will underline all of these "sirs." Okay. The other thing is that many of these inscriptions often end in a particular formula. So these are often donatory inscriptions. That is, something has been donated and then the person donating has put an inscription saying so and so donated such and such thing. And which means that the ending word is almost always Deya Dhamma, given to the faith. Okay. So you can separate out Deya Dhamma, and that is your first word and first unit of meaning taken out. And then everywhere else, you underline the "sir." Okay. So Sami Kupasaka Sapodi Deya Dhamma Sa Sa Sa. Okay. And then you try and see if the remaining is making sense. Okay. So you take out this "sir," you attach it here. Okay. You take out this "sir" and you attach it here, and you see if it is making any sense. So Soparaga Negamasa, Mikupasaka, Mikupasa Kasa, Podi Deyadama. Now this is a little bit of nonsense. Okay, because it makes it's only pulled out one word, Podi, which means water tank. Okay, but the other 3 are still a little bit of nonsense. Okay, but it is now making some sense if you were to take out this top "sir" and dump it here. Okay, so, and then Soparaga Negama, and then you can separate it into 2 clear words, Soparaga and Negama. So Soparaga is the town of Sopara. Negama means merchant, neat. Okay, and then this lot, then you realize that this is actually, all of it is one word, Samikupasakasa. Okay, belonging to the Samikupasaka, which is the lay worshipper. Okay, so on the basis of that, you finally manage to parse out this inscription. Okay, so these case endings are super useful when you are studied, and that is how you first break through and you figure out how the sentences are structured. Okay. Now, Sanskrit has a tremendous amount of sandhi. Okay. Now, see, sandhi comes from actually the spoken language. When people are speaking, they often words ending in vowels and words ending in certain kinds of consonants can often seamlessly merge into each other when we're speaking. In fact, as I'm speaking without any punctuation, right? Except for all the pauses that I'm taking, sometimes short pauses, sometimes long pauses, changes in tone of my voice and all of that. But as we speak, we often elide, as the word is known as, especially when words end in vowels and the following word begins in a vowel. Okay. So, Sita Ashwam Ichhati. Now, when we generally speaking loudly, we'll say Sita Ashwam Ichhati. And people who are used to Sanskrit will immediately know that it simply means Sita, Ashwam, horse, Ichhati, wants. So, Sita wants a horse. Okay. And then there are multiple rules about how vowels combine, how things. So, there are a whole lot of Sandhi rules. They're actually very intuitive. It's when you try to learn them disinterestedly through a whole bunch of rules is when you can get completely trapped. And most of us have had bad Sanskrit teachers, and this intuitiveness was never really emphasized. Okay, but the good part of Sandhi is, suppose you encounter a Sandhified sentence. So, Shabar Yodhanam Ichchati. Okay, now you will wonder how to break it. So, one simple rule is to first detach the verb. Okay. And then you see how you detach the remainder. So, if this says Shabar Yodhanam Ichchati, so Ichchati is clearly a verb because it ends in T. Okay. Ichcha. So, it's Ichchati and not Michchati. So you separate it as Shabar Yodhanam Ichchati. Okay. You've taken the verb out and you see. So, it is rare to ever break a word like this. Okay, you always remove the verb first. Then you see where to break the rest. Okay, so Shabari, Odanam, Shabari, and rice are the two words that make sense. Okay, Baryodanam makes no sense. Shaba, Diodanam makes no sense. Okay, Shabaryo, Danam makes no sense. So Shabari, Odanam is the only one that makes sense. And therefore, you are able to split it like this. Splitting uh, actual meaning of the sentence is like one of those big tasks. And for a whole lot of people, the years and years and years of study of a sacred text is mostly really being able to parse through the Sandhi and try and figure out, mentally juggling the words in your head, okay, to be able to figure out what the original author intended and therefore to make out its meaning. Okay. Similarly, with a word like Neelash Chandra Gachati. Okay. So the first thing we do is you look at this T here, which means it's a verb. So we figure out what the verb is. The verb is Gach. So we take that down. The rest of it is Neelash Chandra. Okay. Now this can sound like a name, Neelash Chandra. Right? But that isn't it. Because there is an here, which means it's an accusative ending. And therefore you would break this up further into Neela Chandram Gachati. Okay. There are other rules like the presence of the sh and the ch here suggests that this is undefined. So the split has to be made here after l and the ch and the sh goes back to being a visarga, which we will come to. So Neela Chandram Gachati. Neel goes to the moon. Okay. So there are various kinds of sandhis and it's generally very, very easy. But this is essentially how this kind of punctuation is. Okay. Today, of course, there are lots of online tools available to split sandhi. Okay. So the Karnataka Sanskrit University has a sandhi splitter online. But sometimes you have to repeat it till it makes sense. Okay. So it can also get tripped up a bit. Now, very closely related is the concept of the visarga. Okay, if you see a visarga in a sentence, 9 out of 10 times it is usually eliminated through sandhification. But if you see it in a sentence, okay, dance like it's the birth of your first child. Okay, because it is one of the most useful grammatical particles in the language. Okay, it is actually a relic of the Indo-European ending S. If you see many Indo-European languages like Latin and Greek, the nominative case singular often ends in an S. Okay, novos in Latin or neos in Greek. Okay, the S has become a softly breathed H in Sanskrit. So Navah. Okay, so Ramah would have been Ramas in Latin or Ramos in Greek. Okay, it is Ramah in Sanskrit. Nilach is Nilas in Latin or Nelos in Greek. Nilach in Sanskrit. So this little Visarga is that thing. Okay, tremendously useful in phonology, morphology, and meter. Okay, so it's very crucial in determining case endings. Okay, now there are two styles of pronouncing the Visarga depending on which. There are lots of shakhas of Sanskrit chanting, and many of them have their own pronunciation rules. So some shakhas pronounce it as a soft h, balakah, ramah. Okay, some people actually add a little echo to it. So it's balakah, ramah, and so on. But whichever way, the moment you see it in print, rejoice. Okay. So in grammatical use, okay, it marks the nominative singular case and several other cases. Okay. And in verbs, it marks the imperative mode and certain other kinds of modes. Not my place for Sanskrit grammar. Okay. And there are rules of Visarga Sandhi, like we saw for Nilesh Chandram Gachati, right? And therefore, when you combine Visarga and Sandhi, you will be able to very easily space out the words and make a lot of sense. Now, there are rules. So, before vowels, there are certain rules. Before unvoiced consonants, there are certain rules. So, Gajah Charanti becomes Gajah Charanti. Okay. Gajah Tishtanti means Gajas Tishtanti. So, the sh, sa, these are like dead giveaways. Okay. To the fact that Sandhi has happened and then you can separate it and then restore the Visarga. Okay. Before voiced consonants, it is simply eliminated. Okay. But you can mentally put it back in. Very similar to the Visarga, okay, are two specific cases of the Visarga. And if you see these, then so this is like you have hit the jackpot in a lottery. So these are two special use cases called the Jihva Mulya and the Upadmani. Okay. And some places there are special text, some places there are they're just written with a visarga without a special symbol. Okay? But in some scripts of India, there are special symbols. So this is the symbol for Jihva Mulya. It's basically when a visarga is followed by k or h. Okay. And then when you're pronouncing it, the pronunciation actually becomes h. Okay. Like the German h in Bach or Buch. Okay. Not k, not k, but h. And it's usually marked, you know, instead of the visarga, you will see a little cross sign or two, opposite facing brackets, or there are different symbols in different scripts. Okay. The Mattepad plates, so these are beautiful copper plates issued by a king called Damodara Varman, and very old, so these are around the 4th, 5th century AD. One of the earliest examples of copper plates in Sanskrit, and they're distinguished because they use both the Jihva Mulya and the Upadmaniya, and there are these special symbols. So this is a version of early period Brahmi, okay, so a little cursive, and this here is the Jihva Mulya, where he is saying Vibhava Kriyate, okay, and it will be pronounced as Vibhava Kriyate, okay, which is creating making a partition for something. Okay. So this is similarly the Upadmani. By the way, the sounds h and f do not exist in Sanskrit otherwise, but only in these special cases. So here is when a visarga is followed by a p or a p. Okay, it's originally p, not f. But when these two follow a visarga, then the sandhi sound is f. Okay, and it's usually written with either this sort of two zeros or infinity sign, okay, or this 90-degree rotated Chhattis ka akada. Okay. So again, from the Matyapat plates, the plates were, I think, whoever wrote these are unique. They contain almost every character out there in the Sanskrit alphabet. So it's the person composing the Matyapat plates took a lot of care to make sure somehow that every possible character that could be written was written. So this is the Upadmaniya here, Hantu Pibati, okay, which when you're reading it together in Sandhi becomes Hantu Pibati. Okay. Chanda is super important in Sanskrit. We will cover it in greater detail. But Visarga also has a big role in Chanda. As I said, usually it is eliminated for metrical convenience, right? But when it is actually there, that is, that means that the person did not want to eliminate two syllables. So, when you have adhikara karmani, eva asti, as opposed to karmani eva adhikara. So, adhikara karmani eva asti. Okay, how many syllables is that? Adhikara karmani eva asti. 9 syllables. Okay, whereas karmanyevadhikaraste. Okay, 8 syllables. So much jugglery for saving one syllable. Right? But that is the poet's art here because they need to fit things into a meter. Therefore, when you actually see a visarga in a verse, be happy because then they've chosen not to do the sandhi in order to keep the count of syllables correct. Okay. So visarga in sandhi has a huge role to play. Okay. So it's like a punctuation mark and it's like a letter of the alphabet, sort of has a double life, but it does a lot of work. Okay. In many modern descendant languages of Sanskrit, the visarga has basically disappeared. But if you still see it, rejoice. Okay. So there are many symbols in our different languages, and in certain languages, it has been adopted for other uses as well. So which I will come to. Okay. Like in the Burmese language, they have no use of the visarga, even though they imported their alphabet from the Sanskrit language. But the Burmese language has no need for the visarga. But it has been reused to mark tone. The Burmese language has multiple tones, and the visarga symbol is used for marking something else. Okay. Similarly, in Lao and Thai, it is used for a different grammatical function, and so on. Okay. It has a very special application in the Tamil language. Okay. Because Tamil, again, grammatically has no need for a visarga. Okay. But it used to have a little function where the oo sound. So Tamil has two oos, the oo and the u. The oo sound is usually not written. It is, in written Tamil it is not used, but in spoken Tamil there is a distinction between the oo sound and the soft u sound. So we will not say paru, we will say paru, see, ange paru, right? See there. But people who sort of learned Tamil through books they will say Ange Paru, and you immediately know that that person is not Tamil. So this is a bit of a shibboleth among Tamil people. Now, in the earlier days, the Visarga was actually used to represent that soft oo. So, you had words like, and now today the only surviving word that still has it is Yah, which means steel. Okay, because otherwise it could be Yeh, which would be a Yegu, sorry, which is a nonsensical term. So it's the only one. But today the Visarga has been adopted to represent a different diacritic for sounds that otherwise don't exist in Tamil. So words like Asif, Azharuddin, Khan, and all use the Visarga along with the existing Tamil letter in order to create a new sound, similar to the Nukta in Hindi. So yeah, the Visargas did a lot of things. Okay. The Anuswara, its sister mark, the Visarga and Anuswara bring up the last of the Swaravali in a typical Indian alphabet. So the Anuswara actually acts as a nasal apostrophe, whereas wherever there is a nasal sound like na, nya, ta, na, nya, na, and ma, so instead of having to write out this sound, you can add an Anuswara. So this is a like the apostrophe in European languages indicates a omitted letter or couple of letters, right? So that is why don't, D-O-N-T, right, is D-O-N apostrophe T, because the apostrophe represents the O. So instead of saying do not, we write don't, but we don't write it without the apostrophe. So we don't say D-O-N-T, we say D-O-N apostrophe T. So the Anuswara acts as a nasal apostrophe, indicating the presence of a nasal letter, even though that is not written now. So instead of Shanka, we say Shanka, Panchayat, Neelakantha, right? Hindi or Bhukampa. Okay. Nowadays, it's very common to write them just with the Anuswara and to completely ignore the nasal letter. But in many older texts, you will actually see that the half akshara is used. And especially in many Sanskrit texts, you'll still see this formation. The unka, unga, or the incha, unja, and so on and so forth. Okay. There was another function that the Anuswara had in the Marathi language, which has, Mugdha ma'am tells me that since 1975, there was a spelling reform and that was thrown out. Okay, which was that, there is this very interesting phenomena called Schwa deletion. That is, when an akshara is written, the implicit need not be pronounced. So in Sanskrit, it has to be pronounced. So that is why when you write Ra-ma, it is Rama in Sanskrit. But it is Ram in Hindi and Marathi. Okay. Karma in Sanskrit, but Karma in Hindi. But in some places in Marathi, the Shwa is eliminated. In some places, it is not eliminated. Okay, so when it is not eliminated, there used to be what was called a silent Anuswara, or sometimes it's also called a Shirobindu, that was placed there to indicate that the Swara has to be fully pronounced. So full, singular, fuller, plural. But in written Devanagari, they look identical, so that silent Anuswara or the Shirobindu is used. So full, singular, fuller, plural. Okay. And various other words. So this is another function of the Anuswara, which acted as, again, doubled up. Some places as a letter of the alphabet, some places as a punctuation mark. Okay. Just as an aside, there used to be, and increasingly this phenomenon is getting lost, but the concept of the Anuswara versus the Anunasika. The Anunasika nasalizes vowels, whereas the Anuswara nasalizes consonants. Okay, but now many of the places, the Anunasika symbol, often known as Chandra Bindu, is getting lost, and we are just putting the Bindu. So this should ideally read Kansya. Okay. The A is the one that we nasalize. Kansya, which means bronze. So Kansya Padak, as you will hear now in the Olympics, we have already landed one Kansya Padak, right? Or two. But nowadays it is written like this, which to older readers will sound like Kansya, not Kansya, but Kansya. Okay, which would imply that you are descended from Kansa. So to older readers, the meaning changes completely. But for modern readers, they will be able to read it as Kansya without any ambiguity. Or they may even read it as Kansya and still not get lose the meaning, because this meaning is not something that they're terribly familiar. So the Anunasika is sort of slowly degrading it to the Anuswara. When I was in school, I used to get beating from my teacher for confusing the two. But I suppose the modern generation has. I think my teacher will now just despair herself for what is going on. So now we'll come to poetic meter. This is the most implicit of all punctuations and the most subtle way of actually discerning meaning. Now, this actually comes from the phenomenon of speech. Like, speech relies heavily on natural pauses, emphasis, tones, right? So when you're asking a question, we have a different tone of voice. When we are surprised, we have a different tone of voice. When we are saying something matter of fact, we have a certain tone of voice. So meter tried to replicate some of these features. Okay. And therefore, meaning and pauses would be inferred in manuscripts from the context and meter. So in fact, if you are reading any old Sanskrit text, the first thing to do is to try and cotton on to what meter is written in. It's very few texts will say, oh, this is written in Trishtub meter, please consider. Or that this is written in Anushtub meter. You have to read the first few sentences and guess, acha, ye to Trishtub meter hai. Good. Then I can mentally sort of, form myself into that chanting mode and then be able to read it rhythmically and work out the meter. So their sentences often align with metrical breaks. And I'll show you an example here. Okay. Although not this, while being my favorite Sanskrit poem, is far too complex for me to explain here. But I will show it with a different one. Okay. So the clause structure, okay, which is literally what we do in modern punctuation, right? How we split and integrated clauses, whether we use colons, so colons indicate, an independent and a dependent clause. Commas do their work. Then there are all kinds of uh, splice commas and Oxford commas. And then there are semicolons that apparently some writers detest the semicolon. Some writers absolutely love the semicolon and things like that. But they're basically meant to separate clauses and make a sentence more palatable. The same thing was done in the past using rhythm and meter. In fact, there is an interesting evolution, especially something that you will see with English poetry, which is that with the rise of punctuation, you actually see the eventual decline of meter. So today you have free verse and what is that other kind of verse? Blank verse and other things that do not depend on metrical structure, but instead use punctuation to bring out the meaning. So modern English poetry barely rhymes. Okay. And even so has little rhythm. The lines are not equal. They don't contain the same number of syllables and all. Okay. So we'll see that because now they look a lot more prosaic or a lot more like prose. You can in fact manage to stitch up an entire modern poem and read it like a piece of prose. Whereas in the earlier ones, because that had rhythm and rhyme and all that, you can't really do that. So this is an observation. I don't know how necessarily true it is, but the moment punctuation becomes a phenomenon of daily life, you see the gradual erosion of metric point. This has happened throughout. Okay. Now, a very important metric technique, okay, is the pada. So whole verses are divided into padas or quarters. Typically, a Sanskrit verse will have four padas. They can be six. They're usually multiples of two. Okay, each pada will form a coherent clause or a phrase. Okay, so as an example, uh, these two very favorite verses of mine, both are curses often found in copper plates. So since I deal a lot with inscriptions, since I teach epigraphy, etc., etc., I often come across these two curses very frequently. So let's take the first one, okay? Swadattam paradattam va yo hareta vasundaram shashti varsha sahasrani vishtayam jayate krumi. Okay. Now this is divided into four padas, which I have indicated in different colors. Okay. Here is another one, which I have very deliberately not, arranged visually, but to show you how. Aramana sahasraicha tadagani shatairapi gavakoti pradhanena bhumihattana shradyate. When you're reading it, you will be mentally able to break it down into four padas. Aramana sahasraicha 1, tadagani shatairapi 1, gavakoti pradhanena 1, bhumihattana shradyate the last. Now let's look at how the padas indicate meaning and punctuation. So the first phrase here in this is Swadattam Paradattam. Okay, given by me and given by others. So Swadattam Paradattam. That's an interest. That's a clause by itself. So you know the meaning of that phrase. Yo Hareta Vasundara. Who steals his property? Okay, so that's another clause. He who steals property, clause 1, given by me or given by others, clause 2. Now that's how it would appear in English. Okay. Shashti Varsha Sahasran. Okay. 60 years, 1,000 times. That is 60,000 years. Okay. Vishtayam Jaya Tekrumi. So that is the operative part of the entire curse. Okay. Will live in human excrement is the final line. So when you put the whole thing, he who steals property given by me or given by others for 60,000 years will live in human excrement. That is the complete thing. It has four clauses. Each of those clauses, okay, makes one pada. And the four padas together make up the verse. Okay, so the ending of the pada is also the ending of the clause. The clause is not split across the meter. And that aids tremendously with understanding the line. Similarly, the other one, Aramana Sahasraischa. Okay, one clause, which means 100 rest houses. Sorry, 1,000 rest houses. Okay, Tadagani Shatairapi. Also 100 lakes. Okay, Gavakoti Pradhanena. Okay, even if you donate 1 crore cows. Bhumiharta Nashudyate. Okay, the stealer of land will not be cleansed. Okay, so four clauses, four padas, one verse. The stealer of land will not be cleansed, even if he builds 1,000 rest houses, digs 100 lakes, or gives away 1 crore of cows. Okay? So, very beautiful parsing. Four clauses separated by four padas. Okay? No need for a comma or any kind of external punctuation. The meter alone does the job. Along with, of course, sandhi and visarga and the other features, right? All of those are baked into this. Okay. Another idea is the use of the caesura. Okay. Which is a pause within a line of poetry. The caesura usually separates two half verses. So two padas are then, there is a longer, so there is a short pause between two padas, and a longer pause after that, and then again a short pause between the next pada and, okay. So here, for example, the first verse of the Mahabharata, Narayanam Namaskritya Naram Chaiva Narottamam. Okay, the structure of the sentence itself makes you pause at Narottamam. Devim Saraswatim Chaiva Tojaya Mudireta. So this one again separates this clause from this clause and adds a bigger pause. Okay. Narayanam Namaskrityam itself one clause. Naram Chaiva Narottamam second clause. But the two are also held in a closer relationship. So this is the caesura. And one way of actually indicating caesura was to write it in a separate line. So the line breaks, as you call it, or very for those who know poetry, the fancy word is enjambment. Okay. But 16th century onwards, the caesura was represented by the danda symbol. So you could then write it in one line, Narayanam Namaskrityam Ram Chaiva Narottamam Danda, Devim Saraswatim Chaiva Tojaya Mudire Danda. Okay. But here, because the sentence is fully over, you put two dandas to say that there's no more caesura, it's completely over. The next verse is a totally new one. Okay. The other thing is hyperbation or hyperbaton, okay, which is words that would otherwise have fit together to make sense can be separated. Why? Because of the inflections, remember. Okay. So that allows you to retain metric structure. Okay. Then there is omission. Okay. Coming back to my favorite curse, Aramana, Sahasraisha, Tadagani, Shatairapi. Okay. So here, for example, we should technically have put in Srujanena or Nirmanena. Okay. By the building of rest houses of lands. But that is sort of implicit in the context. So adding that will destroy the meter and therefore knocked off. Okay. But by the context, you know that the word pradhanena is actually also carrying that, right? Because you're going to build a rest house and then donate it to travelers, building a lake and then donating it. So the pradhanena actually carries a second meaning that is not actually required of it. But it does the job. It's like when one employee is absent and you are required to do their job as well alongside your job, right? So these are metric techniques. So you use these to figure out the punctuations. Okay. Anastrophe means placing words outside their usual order, which is again, we've encountered this with Karmanya Vachika, but one very useful feature of this is it allows you to highlight a particular word, okay, by placing it ahead so that you will know that that word carries the drama of the sentence. And here in Meghaduta, where this word carries all the drama of the entire play, right? Shape nastangamita mahima. The curse, right, is the turning point of the entire play, and therefore, the way it is placed here makes a lot of difference. Had it been in the regular speaking style, it would have come Shapena Varsha Bhogyana Bhartu. May not have carried the same impact and also metrically answer. Even if it is metrically sound, you might still want to do this just to bring about that emphasis. Okay. Now, the last bit of implicit punctuation is this entire system of classifiers. Okay. And this is actually very, very common in pre-punctuation languages. And in modern languages actually has gone down a bit, but it is still around. Okay. So this was used to remove semantic ambiguity. So these were words. This is literally spoken punctuation. These were words that people were saying aloud, but that really weren't necessary, but only helped to clarify things. Often these were used to accompany numerals or quantifiers and, help to be So let's see a few examples. Okay. So for example, in Hindi, you say, do jod jute, right? Or ek guch methi, where the jod, guch, okay, ek than kapda. These words indicate a certain measure. You can comfortably say do jute. That's not a problem. Ek methi would, well, sound odd. There it's needed, right? But instead of saying ek than kapda, you can say ek meter kapda, but that's a more specific measure. So, but these indicate the class of vowel, right? So, jute are typically a thing that come in pairs. So, the word jod implies that they come in pair. Similarly, in Bangla, okay? So, there are like Ectiboy, okay? Chartocolor. And there are different classifier words like this, okay? Almost all Indian languages have them. A collection of poems, okay? Urupai Arisi. Similarly, for various other Indian languages, okay, they exist across the thing. Why? Because most of these languages are oral and these classifiers are very, very important. And these exist across languages across the world. So they're very important. If anyone is learning Chinese, you'll know that you have to learn a whole lot of Chinese classifiers. Anyone dealing with Egyptian hieroglyphs, which is how I started, will know that you have to learn a whole lot of hieroglyphs whose only function in the inscription is to indicate a certain class of what is being talked about. Okay. So, you know, if in Marathi, for example, you go by do nag pav, ek ghat pani. And similarly, such words exist in all, frankly, across all languages. They even exist in English. Like you say, a pair of socks or 6 head of cattle, right? Americans will simply say one water. And that means one glass of water. I used to find it awkward when I used to speak to Americans, they would want one water. Like, what do you mean one water? Water is not a countable noun, but they imply one glass of water. But we all say a glass pani, right? Or one tumbler of water. Or as the UK people say, bawa. So those are classifiers. So various kinds of implicit punctuation. Explicit punctuation, which is what we are actually used to seeing as punctuation, is actually fairly tiny and very recent. Okay. But there are a few interesting marks and a few interesting uses of those. Okay. The most common one that you see is the danda and is duplicated from the double danda. Okay. The danda usually marks the caesura. The double danda marks the end of a verse. Okay. So here, for example, in this Bundeli manuscript, which is this is verse used to illustrate a lovely miniature. But here you see this verse ending here, the double danda, and then this chaupahi. So now this is very interesting. This is then indicating the meter of the following line. Okay. So this one has 4 padas and they are indicated by single dandas. Okay. And then this ends here. And then there is a number. So these numbers also add to the punctuation. They tell you the number of verses that you have to look in. Okay. So look at this lovely chopper here. Okay. 1 pada, 2nd pada. Okay. 10. The pada finishes. Sorry, here. 1 pada, 2nd pada. Okay. Then caesura, 3rd pada, 4th pada, double danda, number 2, double danda. So here what is happening is the single danda is being used to implicate the end of a pada, double danda, the end of a caesura, and the number, the end of the verse itself. Okay, so 3 levels of punctuation. Where we would have in English, suppose, say, used a comma, then a semicolon, and a full stop. Okay. The other very common punctuation mark that you will often see is the avagraha. Okay, which it's a specific symbol meaning the merging or omission of a vowel or a visarga. Okay, but it can also have other functions. So Shivoham. Okay, which is basically sandhi of Shiva plus Aham. But it is not necessary to put the avagraha, but if it is there, then again it's a giveaway that look, it is meant to separate Shiva and Aham. Or Ramosti, Rama and Asti. Okay, Surarka. So in Sanskrit, the avagraha has a specific function. In many modern Indian languages, the avagraha has a different role altogether. It's usually used for prolonging vowel sounds. Okay, so when your mother says something outrageous and your first action, ma, amma, right? And that vowel is elongated. So in written Hindi or written other languages, you will add one or two avagrahas, especially to show how long you have to pronounce it. This is especially for film scripts and dramas and all that, that is necessary. The avagraha itself can carry a chandrabindu, so ha extended, or sometimes it can be placed above thing if there is like a space crunch or you want to add the avagraha a little later on. Okay. It also adds to concept of syllabic continuity. That is, suppose you have a, so this is from the Yajurveda, Namo astu Nilagrivaya Sahasrakshaya Midhushe, Athoye asya sattva noham tebhyo karannam. Okay. So here the avagraha indicates the number of syllables is not to be condensed. Okay. So while ordinary reading, you would have sattva noham tebhyo karanam. Okay. Then the metrical reading would have been broken. So the avagraha is added there to tell you not to swallow up that syllable. Okay. So again, there are multiple symbols in multiple languages. The avagraha is usually not taught in school. So sometimes when you encounter in print, you can get, hey, what on earth is this? Okay. Then we come to two very beautiful symbols. They call the Pushpika and the Pushpa. Okay. So here's a very beautiful example of a Pushpa from the Bhaktali manuscript, which is the oldest manuscript found in the Indian subcontinent, which is a work of mathematics. But the Pushpa or this flower symbol is used when you want to highlight a certain verse. So here, see, highlighting can be done in many ways. One way is to use color. Okay. So here, for example, the punctuation marks have all been highlighted in red. There are manuscripts in which many words themselves are highlighted in different colors. But if you maybe don't have access to that, then you can use this Pushpa symbol to say that this is a particularly important verse. And therefore, you must pay extra attention to this verse. That this is an important statement within the entire text. Related to it is the Pushpika, which indicates gaps. So sometimes in a manuscript, okay, there may be space left over either at the end of a line or between two verses. And then if you're not adding numbers, you can add a Pushpika just to say that take a break here. And then, take a breath and read the next one. So that is there. Okay. And as I said, numbering, which we've already seen, is often used for the counting of verses and adds a higher level of punctuation where you feel the need for it. So that much was for implicit and explicit punctuation. We'll take a short half-minute break and then we will look at cantillation marks. Okay. Cantillation is slightly different from punctuation. Cantillation marks are diacritics that are used in text that are meant to be chanted. So these actually sort of turn up somewhat late in the evolution of writing. And they're actually a sort of not completely adequate substitute for learning the pronunciation of words. So usually you would learn with a guru or an ustad or a master, and he would tell you the correct intonation, the correct way to chant, especially religious verses. Okay, these are very important because in various different religious contexts, how you exactly chant a verse supposedly affects its powers. So if you're chanting a verse to, pray to God so that rain will fall on your country, and then if the rain didn't fall, they'll tell you that you did not cantillate it properly. So you'll try again. Okay? Or somebody might tell you that because you incorrectly cantillated, the gods got angry. And so later on now, as people, the when texts were transmitted over distances, and this actual method of sitting with a Guruji and learning the actual pronunciation was difficult, then these cantillation marks start to appear. Okay? So they appear at various different phases in the evolution of different scripts. Okay? So these are different from punctuation marks and almost entirely used in a religious context. Sorry, too many. The important use of cantillation is in Vedic swaras. Okay. Now the concept of swaras, and there are a whole number of swaras and correct pronunciation. This is part of the oral literature. Okay. So these cantillation marks are actually from the 18th century onwards that they get added to written texts, because then these are aiding people in the absence of other people who could have otherwise. So, you may have had a Guruji or a senior who may have helped you with pronunciation, but in the absence of those, then you start using these marks to know, what tone to pronounce the letters in. So these are called swara marks. Now, as the different Vedic shakhas across the country often develop different notation styles. And therefore, what I'm showing you is just one particular Rigveda Shaka style. But other schools have their own notation. So you have to learn the notations also by school. Okay. So these Vedic swaras are important, and the chanting of Vedas is actually now become a must. Inscribed by UNESCO as one of the masterpieces of oral and intangible heritage of humanity. So that makes these cantillation marks important. Okay? Let's have a look at it. Okay. The Rigveda has three swaras, the Udatta, Anudatta, and Swarita. And these are the ones we will discuss today. Okay. The Yajurveda has further accents, and the Samaveda has 7 accents. The Samaveda comes close to, Samaveda is considered the origin of Indian classical music, and the ability to actually sing the melody was important, known as Samagana. So the three main swaras are the Udatta, which is a raised swara, a high pitch. Okay. The Swarita, a declining pitch, so from high to low. And the Anudatta, which is actually a bass pitch. Okay. So, ka, ka, ka. Okay. So 3 tones. I am not a musical person. Okay. When I was learning to play the Carnatic violin, my music teacher very, very specifically told me not to try and sing the swaras, to just mentally do saregama in my head and play the violin, because if I sang, then he would get a headache. So I am therefore sort of, in honor of my guru, I do not try to pronounce the tones. Okay. In the Rig Veda, they're marked by these markers. There's a little vertical dash, a dash and a horizontal dash, and a horizontal dash like this. In the Samaveda, they're marked by numbers. Okay, in the Samaveda, so apart from these three, there are a total of 7 with different names for them. And so the Samveda just decided, instead of figuring out a whole bunch of marks and then confusing the heck out of ourselves, whoever decided the cantillation for the Samveda just decided to use numbers. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 8 is not used, but 9 is used, and then 0 is also used. So they have other uses. Okay. So the three main ones are the Udatta, okay, which is a small vertical line above the syllable, which indicates a high-pitched tone. Okay, so when you are pronouncing this, you have to immediately raise your pitch a little. Okay, see, this really comes only if you try to do it all by yourself, it usually results in something hilarious. So usually most of these are done by oral learning, where you sit with chanters and you learn the chanting correctly. Okay, but these are used in print transmission to indicate the marks. The Anudatta indicates a low pitched tone. And the Swarita indicates a transition between these two tones. When you're going from Udatta to Anudatta, the intermediate tone is Swarita. Okay? And then there are levels to which your tone can fall. So there is a double Swarita and a triple Swarita that are marked. Okay? This is especially so for Yajurveda, Atharvaveda, and Samaveda. And Rigveda is kind of not so problematic. It has 3 and we're generally okay with these. There are additional marks for indicating other things. Okay, so you have the prachaya, which means that there is a secondary high pitch. So after the udatta, there's a slight rise and fall, which tells you that that is a very specific pronunciation. Okay, the kampa is used to again prolong a certain sound, and then there are swarita sounds which do not directly follow an udatta. So you have a flat tone. So, the flat tone is just not marked. So, which is also my favorite tone because that's the one I can manage. Okay. So, she may is a flat tone. And true has to be a high tone. Shaswa is again a flat tone. Okay. Vitte, sorry about my pronunciation. Okay. I'm sure I'm going to incur some words curse. This is a low tone, but usually a Swarita will follow an Udatta, and it therefore not necessary, right? Because you're going from a high tone to a flat tone. So there is going to be a to fall in tone, but doesn't have to be marked with the Swarita. But sometimes you will have a flat tone, okay? Uh, then followed by a Swarita. That means you have to raise the tone and drop it. Okay? So Nirma, flat tone, then, oh God, I don't know how to remember. Huh. So, it will rise and then drop. So that is an independent swing as opposed to a dependent swing. So all of these are marked and there are additional marks. Now the independent Swarita has a very large number of marks. Different schools have figured out different ways of writing this and therefore there is no consensus. There are about 7 or 8 different marks used in different texts. Okay. Furthermore, there is this one called the Karshana, which literally means a dragged out tone. The Shara means a skipping tone. So it's usually from Krushta to, sorry if it sounds super technical, but it means that you are jumping from this tone, Krushta, to this tone. So instead of a smooth slide, make a big jump. So that's a very abrupt jump. Okay. Prenka is a vibrato, so like a gamaka, a little tremble in your voice. Okay. And the Nishwasa is almost nice marks because that tells you stop chanting. You can take a microsecond of a breath. So when you're chanting for like long hours and you see a Nishwasa, happiness just runs through your nervous system. Yeah, I can take a breath, just for a couple of seconds, but I can still take it. Okay. Now, the visarga, right? Now, when there is a visarga, then you have to pronounce a little but that can also take cantillation marks. Similarly, visarga and anuswara. So then there are interesting additional marks. So there is the visarga swarita, visarga udata, and so on. Okay. The antar gomukha is very interesting, which is a long vowel with a short anuswara. So, which means ka. Okay. Vowel is long, but the anuswara is short. Ka. Then this last symbol, which is the vowel is short, but the anuswara is long. So, ka. Okay, like a tanpura. Ka. As opposed to the antar gomukha, it's a long vowel, but a very abrupt anuswara. Ka. Similar to Vedic cantillation is Quranic cantillation. It has its own laws, and I will only cover a very, very small aspect. Similarly, as the Vedic cantillation, it is an ocean in itself. I have just given you a glimpse of it. Similarly with Quranic cantillation. Okay. Arabic diacritics actually exist at 4 levels. There is the rasam plus ijam, plus harakat, and plus the tanween. Okay. The rasam is basically just this on the right. Okay. The letters without any markings whatsoever. Okay. Does not very hard to read, but very many early copies of the Quran. A copy of the Quran is called a mushaf. So very early mushafs just had the rasam, just the letters without any dots marking anything. Incredibly hard to read. And why? Because there is something called ijam, which indicates dots, which separates the letters. So this phrase, for example, al-abjadiye al-arabi, it simply means the Arabic alphabet. Okay? In Arabic. So al-abjadiye al-arabi. But now, without the rasam, you can't say what letter this is. Is it a b? Is it a y? Is it a t? Is it a n? Okay? Because all of those are decided by what kind of dots you put under or above. So these dots are called ijam, and these are compulsory when writing. So in modern writing of Arabic, writing the rasam plus the ijam is very important. So al-arabiyah, this dot indicates the b. Al-abjadiyah, sorry, indicates the b, this indicates j, the, ya, ha, and so on. Okay, al-abjadiyah, al-arabiyah. Now, for indicating vowels and for precise pronunciation, you have a whole set of other marks known as the tashkil. Okay. Now, typically, this is the ideally the best because this removes all ambiguity, but it is seen as something that is necessary only for kids and new learners. If as an adult you are writing all the tashkil, then they consider you slightly retarded in your literal development. So after a phase in your learning, you're supposed to drop the tashkil. Okay. So typically, for example, this is daily use Arabic, right? It just has the rasam plus ijam and occasionally tashkil in case you need to sort of clear ambiguity. But in literary Arabic, especially when you're teaching and all Quranic texts must have the full lot. Okay. So this makes sure that it is pronounced correctly. Okay. So tashkil consists of a number of marks. The common ones are the harakat or the short vowel marks. They're known as the fatha. Okay. So this is the da. So short a and long a. So the da. Kasra is e. D. Okay. Short e. And dhamma is short u. So do. So fatha, kasra and dhamma. These are in writing a letter to some friend of yours. If you use fatha, kasra, dhamma, then you are seen as a kid. Okay, so these are usually supposed to be implied and not written down. When I was learning the Arabic script, I would write letters in Urdu to a friend of mine. I would write them in full with Fatha, Kasra, Dhamma and say like, you've reached a stage now, darling, when you can stop writing these because otherwise I will have to keep thinking that a kid is writing it. So then I learn not to write Fatha, Kasra. There are other tashkil that have further grammatical uses. So the alif madda, which is used to extend a. So, above an alif becomes a. Then alif wasla, which is now I've forgotten what its job is. The sukoon ends means absolutely no vowel at all. Sound. Okay, and the shadda means a doubling of the sound. So the. Okay. So if you apply all these diacritics, okay, so the alif wasla is an alif with glottal stop. Okay. So Al-Quran as written here. Okay. The purple ones show the ijam, which have to be absolutely written. But this is the alif with a wasla that says it's a fresh word, starts with a glottal stop. Okay. The sukoon says that the la carries no vowel at all. So al, with stop. Quran. So this is a dhamma, which means there's a short u. So ku, not ka. If you say Al-Quran and not Al-Quran or, then ra, but with another sukoon. So again, there is no kur. Stop there. It's not Quran. It's not a runaway a. Kur, stop, an. Okay. So that is why in English it's often spelt with an apostrophe. Tell you that you stop at R and then restart the R. Al-Quran, not Al-Quran. Okay. And then you have the final layer of Tanween. Okay, so Arabic has three cases, the nominative, genitive, and accusative. Now, as I told you, in Sanskrit, these cases are super useful in determining the punctuation. In Arabic, the cases are usually rarely ever written. Okay. But when you're writing the Quran, because the cases, the pronunciation is very important, these have to be written. Now, these don't have to be written in daily conversation. Okay. But in reciting a Quranic verse, you have to know them because that needs to be pronounced. Okay. So this is my name, Ramesh. Okay. If I want to say my name that I am doing something, Ramesh, and then I will use an un. So it will be Rameshu. That is my nominative case. If I say that this is my book, I will say Al Kitab Rameshi. Okay. My book. And look at Ramesh. So Ramesha. Okay. So different cases have these issues. So this is called nunation or tanween. And this is, as I said, very important in the Quran, but otherwise nobody ever really bothers it in written Arabic. Okay. So that completes cantillation for both Vedic and Quranic works. So if we have time, we'll carry on a little glimpse into punctuation outside India, because there have been traditional punctuation marks in various other languages as well. Okay. For example, in Spanish, okay, questions must start with an inverted question mark and end with a straight question mark. And similarly, an exclamation must start with an inverted exclamation mark and end with a straight one. Okay? These are rules that have been set in stone by the Spanish Academy, and it's considered grammatically wrong to skip them. Okay, although many writers have complained that basically takes the element of surprise out of it. You know that a sentence is a definite question because it starts with an inverted question mark. So you can't play around with words there. But that helps clarify meaning, sometimes costing you poetic license. Okay? In French, you have these marks called the guillemets, which are used as quotation marks instead of the quotation marks that we use in English. Okay. And in French, certain punctuation marks have to be used with a space. So you say bonjour, space, exclamation mark. If you eliminate the space, it's considered grammatically wrong. Okay. In German, there are other marks. So this little mark that everybody who struggled with German will understand. This means it's a double S. So it's a kind of apostrophe. Okay, and German quotation marks begin in this different style where the initial is actually below and the final is on top. Okay. In Greek, the question mark is actually represented by what looks to English like a semicolon. Okay. And in Greek, there is no semicolon. They will just take the dot and put it above. If the dot is above, it's a semicolon. If it's below, it's a stop. Okay. CJK is usually short form for Chinese, Japanese, Korean because they all use the Hanji script and they have similar punctuation systems. Okay. So this is the Juhao, which is like the English full stop. Okay. Invented in modern times. Okay. Then they have the Shungjiantian, which is the middle dot. Okay. So they use it for instead of the hyphen. So where India, Pakistan, we will write with a hyphen, they will write it with a middle dot. They also use it for the decimal point. Okay. Then their quotation marks have different shapes. Okay. And they have a wave dash which functions like the avagraha. Okay. Chinese has two kinds of commas. The ordinary comma is used to separate clauses, whereas they have a new kind of comma called the dunhao, which is used to separate words in a list. Okay, so tall, dark, handsome will use the dunhao, whereas different kind of separate clauses will use the English comma. Okay, so Japanese similarly has this called the toten, which works like the dunhao. Okay, uh, but they also have a symbol like the Hindi avagraha, which is called the chonpu. Now, Japanese, modern printed Japanese is written horizontally, but traditionally it was written vertically. So according to which direction is written, the punctuation also rotates. One very traditional form of punctuation in Japanese is the kireji, which, anyone who writes haiku poetry will be very familiar. Okay. Which is basically used to indicate semantic breaks. Okay. So the moment you see the syllable in a sentence, because see, here, for example, this very famous haiku, Furuikeya kawazu tobikomu mizu no oto. Okay. There is no punctuation. So how do you know where to break the line? So that is where you have this little syllable, ya, inserted, which tells you how to break it. So, and there are 18 such kireji which have separate semantic functions. So here it means that this word is to be emphasized. So furuike, okay, the old point is to be emphasized. Then kawazu tobikomu mizono. So this indicates where the haiku is breaking. Okay, or similarly here, hatsu shigore sarumo kome o hashigena. Okay, so in hatsu it emphasizes the thing and it also puts the sort of uh, tense of the sentence so that you know which mood to read it in. Okay. Korean again has two different distinct commas for separating clauses and separating words. Okay. Arabic has a number of adaptations of the Western punctuation marks alongside all those that I showed you. But they have, so the al-fasila, they use like the English comma, but you read it from right to left and it turns upwards. Okay. The nukta is used as a full stop. Fasila al-mankuta is the English semicolon. Okay. And since they write from right to left, the question mark has been turned around. Okay. Hebrew has its own set of punctuation marks. Where they have further punctuation marks to indicate, for example, whether something is an abbreviation or an acronym. Okay. So in India, for example, a mudra loan, mudra is an acronym So if we were to use mudra in a sentence, how do you know whether you are implying mudra as in the government acronym for its government scheme, or mudra which otherwise generally means currency? Okay, so we don't have any marker in Hindi to do that. We might just use quotation marks. Okay, Hebrew has special punctuation marks just to indicate this. So they felt that need and they put it in. Okay, if you go to this Wikipedia entry on the Unicode entry for punctuation, you will find a wide variety of marks used across languages, across the world for functions that you didn't realize required a punctuation. Okay, any number of brackets, any number of, okay, some of them are only used by printers like the hash and the other things. Okay, or the two most famous punctuation marks that are not punctuation marks, okay, which are used by printers, okay, but known to all of us as two lovable French comic characters, Asterix and Obelix. Okay, they owe their names to punctuation marks. Okay, this star shape is where the asterisk comes from, and another shape which is like a long stick, which marks an obelisk, marks paragraph separation, and which is where the character of Obelix comes. So with this little factoid, thank you very much for listening into me. Do we have any questions?
Hi, Ramesh sir.
Yes, sir.
Thanks. A lot of it went, all over my head, but I was here to get the feel, or to get to, just to get some kind of a aesthetic sense about it all. So, my question to that last one, that obelisk thing that you said, that's that. I used to think it was a cross, like a that you used it for. Especially, we use that sign for taxon, indicating taxon which are extinct. Is that the same one you're referring to?
Yes. So it has
Okay.
different functions for printers, and then other people have reused it for other purposes.
Okay, so the use of it for this thing is not a feature of language, but it is just appropriation for scientific purposes in a different form. That makes.
Yes, yes.
Okay. Thank you so much. I'm really blown to know that there was so much depth to the way people spoke, and the way that the amount of care that they took to mark it down, so that that speaking would be faithfully reproduced, especially of our classical oral literature. Thank you so much for introducing us to this.
Thank you, sir. Someone raised their hand.
Yeah, hello.
Yes,
Yeah, so I have a question.
sir.
In the early slides, when you told me that Indian languages have, it's very easy to, I guess, learn Indian languages. So, no, there's a form, like grammatically, it's not necessary or something. I don't remember exactly that. Uh, no, so my question is, what are the main problems for Indian people to learn a European language? Like what do they encounter which they are not familiar because with if it makes sense.
Yes, so I'll tell you, there are two things so Indians have a very strong distinction of vowel length.
Yeah.
Okay, and we use our metric structure to drive emphasis.
Yeah.
Okay, for which reason we don't have any accents.
Mhm.
or any emphasis marks, no stresses. Okay. So when we speak English to a European or to an American, they often wonder how our English is entirely flat, monotone.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. For European languages, they do not have a vowel distinction. Short vowel, long vowel makes no difference to them.
Okay.
Okay. But stress makes a huge difference. Okay. So in every word, specific syllables are stressed.
Okay.
Okay. So like in the English word market,
Hmm.
mar is stressed, ket is not stressed.
Okay.
Okay. In the French word bizarre,
Hmm.
following the French style, bis is not stressed, zar is stressed. Bizarre.
Yeah.
Okay. And their poetry and their metric structure depends entirely on stresses.
Yeah.
Okay, what is stressed and what is not stressed? All Shakespeare and poetry, all Keats, Wordsworth, all of those, you have to go by the stresses.
Hmm.
Okay. In Indian poetry, it is vowel length, consonant doubling, all of that matters to the metric structure. So at the very core, this is the core incompatibility between Indian and European languages. And so, I mean, most Indians easily learn languages. Most of us are multilingual, and therefore our
Yeah.
ability to learn a foreign language is much easier than it is for a foreigner to learn our language. Most Europeans are monolingual.
Yeah.
Okay, if you live in France all your life, you can actually get away with knowing only French.
Hmm.
Or the same for Slovenia, or Poland, or Netherlands. Or in India, essentially we know Hindi, some amount of English, some amount of neighboring state language, etc. Right? So
Yeah.
most of our big cities are multilingual anyway. Most of us who've gone through an education system are multilingual. Like neither of us is first language is English, right? Yet we are talking in English.
Yeah. True.
So we are therefore multilingual and therefore much easier for us to learn a foreign language. What we are not able to learn are the stress patterns, because that's a concept completely alien to us.
Okay.
And for Europeans learning Indian language are the same thing. They don't understand vowel length at all.
Yes. Uh, I have another question. For example, uh, like there have been multiple migrations to India, like from Southeast Asia and all. So I think I've read about a tribe from Chhattisgarh which has like language very similar to uh, like Vietnamese or some stuff. So I just wanted to know how much did that influence our language, or is it like just a particular case, like a single case? Mm, if it makes.
Oh, no. So those are the Austroasiatic languages. Those have been in India for a very long time. They have not migrated from Southeast Asia.
Okay,
They are remnants of an older population.
okay,
Their languages are related, but they're not recent migrants.
okay,
And there they are. Therefore, and they have a tremendous influence on modern. So modern Indian languages fall into three main language families. You know, the Indic language family, the Dravidian, and the uh, Austroasiatic, and all three have influenced each other very deeply.
okay.
But that's outside the scope of the lecture, because that's into core
I understand.
linguistics.
Yeah, I just understood. It was just a question that I had in my mind. Uh, Another question is very different. How many languages do you speak? Like I saw you speak Tamil and some other languages.
Fluently, I speak 6,
Oh,
and there
nice.
are
That's very.
another 25.
Thank you. That's it. Thank you, sir. Yep.
Thank you.
Hello, sir.
Yes, Tejali.
Hi, Tej. Okay, you could speak my name properly. I'm very happy. Sir, actually, I loved your presentation. I am a linguist. I mean, I have recently turned into linguistics. I was into journalism. I'm curious if you could share this PDF, because there are so many things, that could I can revisit again and rethink and retrace and try to find even better things. So, by any chance, can you share this PPT or these
You
resources?
will
So,
find this in I mean, the lectures will be live on YouTube, so you can go
okay,
back
so
and
from
check it
there
out.
I can get, because sir, I
Yes.
mean, I keep writing a lot about Marathi language and how structures work and everything, and I really feel there is a lot to grasp from this thought also, that punctuations that we see today, like we say that we have got punctuations from Western what theories or whatever, but the kind of punctuations we have, it's a huge thought and it's really insightful. So I would definitely love to take a deep into it and have process it in even even
Sure. Thank you.
deeper manner. It's wonderful. I'm really happy that I could understand most of the things, and I really got some good insights, and
I'm
really
very
thank you, sir.
grateful. Thank you. There's a question by Akash Rao from YouTube where he says the Tamil language also has this concept of Aitam, which somewhat works like a Visarga. Aitam is just the Tamil word for Visarga, so it's the exact same thing. What is the status of the first sound in Sanskrit? So Sanskrit technically does not have the first sound, except when it happens in the Upadmani. It's a very, very rare occurrence, but it's still there. So thank you very much. If you have no further questions, can we end the session? You can always, most of you are, I think, in the WhatsApp group, so you can always continue questions there and I will answer them to the best of my ability. If not, I will point you to resources where you will get your answers.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, everyone. Now I'll end the meet.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.